ask Assessor Jim a question. If someone locates a tent city, say 35 of the 12 by 12 boxes next to my property, how will that affect the assessment or the value of my property?
Well, that's a good question. One, would think that if it was a rather permanent structure, that it might have an impact. I got in trouble early on in my career when the mental health folks were locating some people up on Petersville Road, right up the road, going the right way. And I was quoted as saying, yeah, that might have an impact. And then I got in trouble because it turns out they were a protected class, the mental health. And so the lawyers got all up to nod about that. But, what we do is we'll just have to watch it and see. And if the properties that sell in that area, start selling for significantly less than our assessed values, more so than other properties of a similar nature, then, we'd lower the assessed value on those. And then, so, I don't know. I guess it's a difficult question. I know it's timely right now.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I'd like to ask the clerk a question. How do you determine who gets on jury duty? What's the process?
Well, first of all, I don't determine it. It is a random computer selection. The way the master jury list is made up, it comes from the voter files. So for those of you who are now thinking of canceling your voter registration, it also includes your driver's license, or it includes a Washington State ID card if you don't have a driver's license. So those three lists are melded together. And from that, we have the master jury list. And then the computer program automatically, we tell them we summon about 30-some thousand jurors. We send out summons a year. So we give that to that person. We send them out. The computer, we say we want 700 this week, and we say 700 random, and they pull 700 random people. We mail the summons out. The next time, 700 random people, we mail out. You'd be surprised the number of people say, I've been called 3 years in a row. Well, we know how many times you've been called. We check. It's not really 3 times in a row.
Thank you. And Steve has a follow-up on that.
I have a question for Dave. How come they call me down there and I always get kicked off? How come?
I just have to guess. You asked that question, so let me guess. First of all, we have nothing to do with that. Once we just summon the jurors, we turn them over. That depends upon the defense and the prosecutor's office.
Necktie you wear.
And they may just think you're probably with your very good juror.
Chris,
Okay, I think it's great that all of you are running unopposed because that's the best way to go. But I love it when there's two people in the fight. Now, no matter what, this is when I vote. If there's somebody unopposed, I write somebody else in. And what happens to those people? Like I've had Vic Ulch run against you, Walt, and Steve. I've got Andy Graham who go against you. And I love you, but I got to put somebody else in the fight. So what? Do you ever contact the people that I write in? You were this close, or how does that happen? What happens to those?
The write-in vote has to come to 1% of the total vote, and before we call them and say, you're going to be in the race. And conversely, when you do that, you increase the cost of elections because we have to count
the economy crashed because
we have to when you write in a vote, it kicks it out of the system, and you have to manually process it. So you automatically increase the cost of elections, which is one of those things that I don't want you to do because we're in a tight budget.
I actually thought Walt was going to offer this. I took a tour of Walt's operations in terms of the election service that he provides to us. And it is remarkable. And I also learned that Goofy is a big opponent. Goofy, Mickey Mouse, those don't need to be counted. They just kind of tally. But when you're voting for Andy, not Griffin, wouldn't count.
Oh, there you go.
But I actually just wanted to commend Walt. The tour that he offers for people to see the process that he goes through, and the transparency of that process is remarkable. And they take their job seriously in terms of zero tolerance for any errors.
We have a question.
I have no question, but I want to say I'm extremely impressed with every one of you, and I'm so glad I'm in Kitsap County.
Speaking of election, the election process, how do you ensure that things don't happen like did the governor's race a few years ago with all the lost ballots that kept showing up? How do you try to
Is that King County?
ensure that, you get a good election the first time without?
In the elections process, I think since 2002, 2004, there were a whole lot of, under the Help America Vote Act, there were a lot of checks and balances that were put in place to ensure that those kinds of things don't happen. For example, there is a little hole in the, and if you come and watch the whole process, a hole in your ballot envelope, and we actually put a string through that and tie them all together so we know that there's nothing left in the envelope. So there's a lot of checks and balances that go into that whole elections process so that we don't miss anything. And then everything's done in dual custody so that two people are actually looking at it when we're duplicating ballots. So there's a tremendous process that I invite everybody to come see, because it does open your eyes to how the election process really works.
Great. One last question from the audience.
Meredith, it's much easier or much more efficient to pay by credit card. So why is it so expensive to pay your property taxes by credit card?
There's actually a law in place that prohibits counties from paying the credit card fee as it relates to property taxes. And I believe that law was put in place. Whenever you use a credit card anywhere, you're actually incurring a fee for the person who is processing the credit card. And for county governments, that cost would just be prohibitive in terms of processing credit card transactions for the collection of property taxes. And actually, by law, it's prohibited. Does that help?
Yeah.
Oh, a couple of countries. Yes, please. Walt.
That becomes a gift of public funds by state statute for to charge that. So we can't pay for personal costs by law.
Dave, you care to contribute?
I actually wanted to ask myself a question.
Nice. We're running out of time, but we get one more in.
So, Dave, why I thought maybe someone's getting at it when we were asking this other question, when no one's running against some of these offices. Why don't more people run for some of these offices? I think there's a difference in this office besides county commissioners. We do not do policy. There's no overarching policy that we do. So when people look at these offices, these are administrative offices where we have to run things according to the RCWs, the Constitution, stuff like that. We don't have a chance to influence other things. And I think a lot of people who run for office want to be in the kind of things where they influence more than just going in and doing a job, because they've already got a job. So why would I want to just trade that job? I want something that's a little more thing where I can kind of influence the way things go. So our jobs are mainly to run good offices. Another question is, should the offices be partisan or nonpartisan? Should they be elected or appointed? And I always like to get this in. I'm kind of neutral on whether they're partisan or nonpartisan, because we don't do anything partisan. I work with the clerk's organization, and half the people I don't know whether they're a Democrat or a Republican, because they just do their job and they all do them well. And I think when you get in these positions, well, you do the job well, or you should get out, that type of thing. But I think the most important, so whether it's partisan or nonpartisan, it doesn't make a lot of difference to me. But I think one thing you never want to do is make these offices appointed. You always want to elect them. Because you'll notice that when you look in government, the places you can't get to people, Larry, I know, knows this with the ferries and stuff, are appointed by somebody else and they serve at the pleasure of somebody else, but you can't always get to their pleasure. So, but when you're elected, you're up every 4 years or every 2 years and you vote the people out. But if you're an appointed person, you can't get to those people. And you'll find that we all answer our telephones, we all get right back to you. But when you do some appointed people, they aren't quite as sure. So you always want to maintain the elected part of these offices.
Thank you. So now, very good contributions. That brings us to the